Welcome back to Whisper of the Past, where we bring to light the untold stories that history almost forgot. Today, we're heading to the scorching deserts of the Southwest in the 1870s, to share a remarkable encounter between cultures that would change lives forever. This is the story of a young farmer who found himself in an impossible situation with three Apache sisters, and what they told him would test everything he thought he knew about trust, survival, and humanity. Stay with us, because this story will surprise you at every turn. The Arizona Territory in 1873 was a place of extremes. The land was beautiful and brutal in equal measure, with towering red rock formations, endless desert stretches, and temperatures that could kill a man if he wasn't careful. It was also a place of conflict, where settlers pushing west clashed with the Apache people who had called this land home for centuries. Our story begins with a 24-year-old farmer named Thomas Whitaker. Thomas was different from many of the settlers who came west seeking quick riches from gold or silver. He came from a farming family in Ohio, and all he wanted was good land to work in a quiet life. He had purchased a small plot near what is now the town of Safford, where a creek provided just enough water to grow crops in that unforgiving climate. Thomas had been warned repeatedly about the Apache. The local settlers spoke of them with fear and hatred, telling stories of raids, attacks, and violence. The army officers at the nearby fort painted them as dangerous savages who couldn't be trusted or reasoned with. Thomas listened to these warnings, but something about them felt incomplete to him. He had been raised by a father who taught him that every person deserved to be judged by their own actions, not by what others said about them. Despite the warnings, Thomas maintained a respectful distance from the conflicts. He didn't join the settler militias, he didn't encroach on lands that clearly belonged to the Apache, and he made it known through traders that he had no interest in fighting. He simply wanted to farm his land in peace. One scorching afternoon in late July, Thomas was working in his cornfield when he noticed something unusual. Three figures were approaching from the east, walking slowly and deliberately. As they got closer, Thomas realized they were women, and from their clothing and appearance, they were Apache. His heart began to race, but he forced himself to remain calm. He set down his hoe and waited. The three women stopped about 20 feet away. They were young, probably ranging from their late teens to mid-20s, and Thomas could see they were sisters by their similar features. They wore traditional Apache clothing, and their dark eyes studied him with a mixture of caution and curiosity. The oldest stepped forward slightly and spoke in broken English mixed with Spanish, languages she had likely learned through trading. She explained that they had been traveling for 3 days. Their family group had been scattered during an army patrol, and they had been separated from their brothers and father. They had very little food and no water left. The creek on Thomas's land was the closest water source, and they were asking permission to drink and rest. Thomas was stunned. Everything he had been told suggested that Apache would simply take what they wanted. Yet here were three women, vulnerable and thirsty, asking permission. He immediately gestured toward the creek and told them to take all the water they needed. The relief on their faces was evident. As the sisters drank from the creek, Thomas brought out some bread, dried meat, and vegetables from his small cabin. The women were hesitant at first, but hunger won out. They ate slowly, with dignity, thanking him in their language. Thomas sat at a respectful distance, not wanting to frighten them. It was the middle sister who finally broke the longer silence. She spoke better English than the oldest, and what she said next caught Thomas completely off guard. She looked at him with wide, curious eyes and said, "We never touched a white man before. They say you are all devils with cold hearts. But you give us food. You give us water. Why?" Thomas didn't know how to answer at first. He thought about all the sermons he had heard about civilizing the savages, all the talk of Apache cruelty, all the fear and hatred that poisoned every interaction between their peoples. And here was this young woman, telling him that her people said the same things about his people. He finally replied simply, "Because you're thirsty. Because you're hungry. That's reason enough." The sister translated for the others, and they looked at him with what seemed like amazement. Over the next few hours, Thomas learned their names. The oldest was Guyan, which meant wise woman. The middle sister was Nalan, meaning maiden. The youngest was Itsiana, a name that meant white stone. Through halting conversation mixing English, Spanish, and hand gestures, they told him about their lives. They described how their people had lived in these lands for generations, following the seasons, hunting, gathering, and living in balance with the harsh environment. They spoke of how the arrival of more and more settlers had disrupted the game, how the army hunted them relentlessly, and how their people were being forced onto reservations where the land was poor and the government promises were broken. Thomas shared his own story, about leaving Ohio after his mother died, about wanting to build something with his own hands, about his loneliness in this vast territory. For the first time, both sides saw each other as human beings with families, dreams, and struggles. As the sun began to set, Nguyen said something that would stay with Thomas for the rest of his life. Through Nalan's translation, she told him, "We were taught that white men only take and destroy. Today you showed us that some white men can also give. This is a new thing for us to know." Thomas felt the weight of her words. He realized that he had been taught similar things about her people, that they were incapable of reason or kindness. Yet here they were, treating him with respect and gratitude. The sisters prepared to leave, saying they needed to find their family before dark. Thomas packed more food for them and refilled their water containers. Then Itsiana, the youngest, did something unexpected. She stepped forward and gently touched Thomas's hand, the briefest of contacts. She smiled shyly and said in careful English, "You are not devil. You are good man." It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, Thomas understood what she had meant earlier. For these sisters, he was the first white settler who had shown them basic human kindness. And for him, they were the first Apache people he had truly met as individuals rather than as the frightening stories he had been told. The three sisters disappeared into the desert twilight, and Thomas never saw them again. But the encounter changed him fundamentally. He began to speak up among the other settlers, telling them his story, arguing that peace was possible if people could just see each other as human beings first. Some called him naive, others called him a traitor to his race. But a few listened and began to question their own prejudices. Years later, Thomas learned through a Apache scout working with the army that three sisters matching their description had made it safely to the reservation where their family had been relocated. The scout mentioned that the sisters had told a story about a farmer who had shown them kindness, and that this story was shared among their people as proof that not all white men were enemies. Thomas eventually married and had children of his own. He told them the story of the three Apache sisters many times. He taught them that the true measure of civilization isn't in the color of someone's skin or the culture they come from, but in how they treat other human beings when they have the power to help or to harm. This encounter in the Arizona desert reminds us that even in the darkest periods of conflict and misunderstanding, individual acts of kindness can bridge seemingly impossible divides. The three Apache sisters and the young farmer each took a risk that day, choosing to trust when everything in their worlds told them not to. Thank you for watching Whisper of the Past. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more forgotten stories that deserve to be remembered. History isn't just about the big events, it's about moments like these, when ordinary people chose compassion over fear.